He wanted nothing more than a quiet night by the water. A man on his own property, seeking peace on land he worked hard to call his own. But peace didn't last long. Within minutes, suspicion rose where it never belonged. Strangers decided. He didn't look like he belonged, on his own lake. And soon, flashing lights and sirens shattered the silence. Police rushed in, believing the call instead of the truth standing before them. How does camping on your own land turn into being treated like a criminal? This story will make you question more than just one night. It will make you question the system itself. It started as a weekend like any other. Marcus had carved out this little slice of peace in his life. A ranch tucked away from the noise, with a quiet lake that shimmered at sunset. To him, that land was more than property. It was a symbol of years of sweat, sacrifice, and dreams finally coming true. For once, he could breathe without the weight of the world pressing down. That evening, he set up a small camp by the water's edge, the fire crackling as the sky turned orange and purple. It was simple. It was ordinary. And it was his. Yet even in that calm, there was a fragile edge Marcus couldn't quite name. Because in too many other stories like his, peace never lasts. What he didn't know was that, not far away, watchful, eyes were already questioning why he was there at all. And soon their suspicion would tear apart the stillness of that night, turning a man's sanctuary into the scene of an accusation that should have been impossible. At first, Marcus didn't notice the car creeping along the dirt road that edged his property. He was too focused on the rhythm of the lake, the flicker of his fire, the rare, soothing silence. But while he was celebrating peace, others were, questioning his presence. A group from the local HOA had spotted him earlier in the day. They didn't see a homeowner. They didn't see a man enjoying the land he rightfully owned. They saw a stranger, black, alone, on the water, and in their eyes that was enough to raise suspicion. Their whispers turned into phone calls. The words suspicious and doesn't belong slipped easily into the conversation, as if ownership was invisible when attached to him. And with those simple words, a narrative was planted. Soon, sirens sliced through the night. The headlights of patrol cars washed over his camp, drowning out the peaceful glow of the fire. Marcus froze as red and blue lights strobed across the lake's surface. His sanctuary had been invaded, turned suddenly into a stage for confrontation. The officers didn't arrive cautiously or curiously. They arrived with certainty, as though a crime had already been committed. Their presence carried weight, not of investigation, but of judgment. Imagine that moment, the sudden shift from calm to chaos. Your heart thuds, your chest tightens, not because you've done wrong, but because you know the world might assume you have. The HOA members stood close by, arms folded, convinced that this would prove their point. In their minds, they had acted responsibly. But what was really happening was something far uglier. A black man's ownership, dignity, and safety being erased in real time by a manufactured suspicion. Marcus reached for the folder of documents he always kept nearby. Proof of what he owned, proof of where he belonged, proof that should have never been necessary. Yet even as he held those papers in his trembling hands, he knew this wasn't simply about land titles or deeds. It was about perception, about power, about the struggle of being seen as a rightful owner of peace in a world that too often questioned his right to exist freely. And still, the tension only grew heavier. For in that moment, those few seconds, before the truth came out, his life dangled in the balance. Would they listen? Would they even believe him? Or would his own lake become the backdrop for yet another tragedy that headlines call a misunderstanding? This was no longer just a camping trip. It was a standoff between truth and prejudice, and truth had to fight for its place. Because what came next would reveal not just who Marcus was, but how quickly a system, a community, and an assumption could turn a man into a suspect on land that bore his very name. And as the officers stepped forward, their hands hovering near their belts, the night reached a breaking point that would decide everything. The officers fanned out quickly, their flashlights cutting through the darkness like blades. Commands barked through the air, sharp, cold, unquestioning. Marcus's heart pounded so violently it felt louder than the chirping crickets that had once been his only soundtrack. He stood frozen, knowing every movement would be judged, every hesitation twisted into suspicion. One officer's hand hovered near his holster, the metallic threat reflecting against the campfire's glow. Another shouted over the crackle of flames, demanding Marcus explain himself. To Marcus, the response was almost laughable. Explain himself here, on his own land, as if existence could ever be proof enough. He lifted the folder of property records carefully, hands trembling, documents flapping in the night air. He wanted to scream, "This is mine, I belong here." But he didn't dare raise his voice. He'd seen what happened when fear sounded too much like defiance. For a moment, time slowed. Would they see papers? Or just another excuse they didn't want to believe? Behind the officers, HOA members watched with smug certainty, as though waiting to see him escorted away in handcuffs. They weren't just standing on the sidelines. They were reinforcing every stereotype that had built this moment. Their eyes didn't search for truth. They searched for confirmation of their own prejudice. And in the center of it all, Marcus stood at the edge of terror, caught in the brutal irony of being both victim and suspect. He had built a life where peace should have lived. Yet here he was, having to prove ownership of his own sanctuary under the shadow of flashing lights and weapons half drawn. The flicker of the campfire burned brighter, as if mocking the coldness of the confrontation. In that instant, it wasn't about the property records or even the lake. It was about survival, the terrifying gamble between being heard and being harmed. Because one wrong move, one misread gesture, and his name could have been etched into the long list of those who never got the chance to tell their own story. And as the silence hung heavy, broken only by police radios crackling in the night, everything came down to a single question. Would truth finally break through? Or would Marcus become just another tragedy written off as policy procedure? In the end, the officers backed away. The documents in Marcus's hands spoke louder than the assumptions stacked against him. The truth was undeniable. This was his land, his lake, his home. Yet victory didn't feel like triumph. It felt hollow, a survival he should have never had to fight for. As the patrol cars rolled out and the HOA members dispersed, Marcus was left standing in the dim glow of his fire, shaken. The peace he had built, the refuge he had earned, had been stolen in moments by suspicion and prejudice. That night, as the lake rippled quietly once more, he realized the scars of the confrontation would linger far longer than the sirens in the distance. Because the real wound wasn't in proving ownership. It was in knowing that ownership alone hadn't protected him. His identity had been questioned before his humanity. And here lay the deeper truth. For many Black Americans, no deed, no achievement, no evidence can fully shield against the grasp of racism. This wasn't just Marcus's story. It was a mirror reflecting countless others. Families stopped in their own neighborhoods, workers questioned in their own offices, children eyed with suspicion in their own schools. Different settings, same twisted question. Do you belong here? Marcus went back to his life, but never again could he see that lakeside fire without remembering the flashing lights crashing through the dark. His story is not about camping, it's about survival in a world that too often rewrites innocence as guilt. So the question remains, for all of us, how many more times will Black lives be put on trial for simply existing? And when will belonging stop being something you have to prove?